Did you ever wonder what would have happened if Garp raised Luffy to become a Marine? Could he become strong enough to achieve the Admiral status? And what would happen to all the islands Straw Hats visited? Well, for starters, we can assume that Luffy's childhood would play out pretty much the same. This means that he would still be raised by Dadan in Fuchsia Village and eat the Gomu Gomu Nomi. The key difference here is that Luffy wouldn't be interested in becoming a pirate and would instead dream of becoming a great Marine, just like his grandfather. Considering Luffy wants to be a Marine now, Garp would visit the village more frequently in order to train him and prepare him for the tough road ahead. His training would go similarly to the original, with Garp putting Luffy in dangerous situations in order for him to develop crucial skills for survival. Also, it's likely that Garp would teach him the basics of hockey as well, as that's pretty much required of every strong Marine. By the time Luffy turned 17, he would already be a capable fighter, much stronger than when he set out to the sea in the original story. It's also during this time that Garp would deem Luffy ready and would take him out to the sea for the first time. Although Luffy's job would mostly be to adjust the sails and clean up the ship, he would be thrilled to finally sail the ocean. As soon as they set sail, Garp would give Luffy his official Marine uniform. Luffy being Luffy would obviously hate it at first, as it isn't comfortable as his regular clothes, but he would eventually come to enjoy wearing it. In addition to his usual chores on the ship, Luffy would also be put through rigorous exercise routines every single day in order to get stronger. And I don't mean just regular training routines that other Marines do, I mean Garp's version of training, which is way more intense and rigorous. Soon after beginning his adventure, Luffy would encounter his first threat, Alvida. I imagine Garp wouldn't want to wake up from his nap in order to fight such a weak pirate, so he would just tell Luffy to handle her himself and to leave him alone. This would be the first time Marine Luffy would showcase everything he has learned and swiftly knock out the pirate with one devastating punch. After he takes Alvida out, Luffy would notice a cabin boy hiding under the desk. They'd bond over their shared experiences as cabin boys, and Luffy would ask 𝐾𝐫𝐲 to join their Marine squad. Although Garp wouldn't be too happy about it, he would see something in 𝐾𝐽 and would decide to let him tag along. After boarding Garp's ship, the crew would make its way to Shellstown to drop off their prisoners and have a chat with the captain in charge of the area. Once they get there, they would see a man tied to a post waiting to get executed. After they learn about Zoro and why he is tied there, Luffy would urge Garp to do something about it. Considering Garp is the Vice Admiral, Captain Morgan would have to obey his orders and immediately release Zoro. Now, although it would be great to imagine how Zoro may join the Marines at this moment and fight alongside Luffy, I don't think that's realistic. What is realistic, though, is you hitting that subscribe button, which would really help the channel out. Thanks. Anyway, Zoro is a pirate hunter and has no interest in serving the government. This is why he would most likely just leave the base and continue his business as usual in the East Blue. Continuing their journey, the group would most likely come across Orangetown and help the local population get rid of the Buggy Pirates. Luffy might even meet Nami here for a brief moment, although they wouldn't really pay attention to each other. The next destination in the original story was Syrup Village. However, in this scenario, Luffy has no real reason to go there. Considering nobody knows about Captain Kuro being alive, it's likely that the crew would just skip this island, leaving Usopp to fend for himself and most likely die protecting Kaya. Okay, that's unfortunate. But what about Sanji? What would happen to him? Well, although Luffy, 𝐾𝐽, and Garp have no real reason to stop at Barati either, it'll actually turn out good for Sanji, considering that Mihawk would soon be arriving to dispatch of Krieg pirates. It won't be long before the crew finally arrives at Loguetown. Here, Garp would use the opportunity to catch up with Smoker, while Luffy and 𝐾𝐽 would get a chance to meet another great Marine worth respecting. Now from here on, there wouldn't be much for Luffy and 𝐾𝐽 to do, so it's most likely that Garp would take them to Marineford in order to train and get stronger. During their time at Marineford, both Luffy and 𝐾𝐽 would significantly improve their skills, learning Rokushiki, a special martial arts style utilized by CP9 members. It's also during this time that they would meet many strong Marines. With some of them, they would become great friends, but with some of them, well, let's just say they wouldn't get along very well. Anyways, after some time, Aokiji would inform Garp about Crocodile and how they need to do something about him as he is completely out of control. Remember, the Marines already planned on capturing Crocodile in the original story. It's just that Luffy defeated him first so they didn't have to act. This is why we can assume that in this version, Marines would send a special team to Alabasta in order to finally dispose of him. Garp would see this as a perfect opportunity for Luffy and 𝐾𝐽 to test their skills and would send them to Alabasta along with Smoker and Hina. After arriving on the island, the group would confront Crocodile directly at his casino. Although Crocodile wouldn't go down without a fight, Luffy is far stronger in this version of the story and even knows Haki. This is why I believe that taking down Crocodile would pose no real problem to him and he'd easily capture him. Later, Later, the group would work with Princess Vivi and King Cobra to find and apprehend the rest of Baroque Works members and stop the civil war within the country. Along the way, they would also capture Nico Robin, a criminal wanted by the government ever since she was a kid. Although Luffy is a Marine now and has a duty to capture criminals, after listening to Robin's story and learning that she is not actually a bad person, Luffy would have a change of heart and let her escape. Smoker would know that Luffy let her escape on purpose, but would decide to let it slide, as he knows Luffy had the best intentions in his heart. News of Crocodile's defeat and Luffy's role in it would quickly spread to the higher-ups, and he would soon get promoted to captain. After returning to Marineford, Garp would be proud of Luffy's achievements and would even introduce him to his friend, the Fleet Admiral Sengoku. From here on, we can assume that Luffy would be sent on various missions for the world government, mostly commanding small teams of Marines in order to protect certain islands or capture pirates. Whenever he had some free time, he would continue his training with Garp and would eventually become a master of hockey, even unlocking the Conquerors. And although everything is going well for Luffy so far, his world will soon be turned upside down. You see, it's around this time that news of Ace's capture would reach Marineford. Same as in the original, the world government would issue an order to have him executed, which would leave both Garp and Luffy in shock. Luffy would immediately ask to go to Impel Down to see him, but the world government wouldn't allow it. He would be outraged by this, but Garp would quickly calm him down and ask him not to do anything stupid that he'll regret. A few days later, Ace would finally arrive at Marineford for his execution, and as soon as Luffy lays his eyes on him, he'd burst into tears. In a matter of minutes, Ace would find himself on the execution platform as the Whitebeard pirates close in on the horizon. Soon after the battle starts, Sengoku would order Ace's execution to commence. Although Luffy initially thought he'd be able to keep his emotions in check, after the execution starts, he'd disregard all orders and jump towards Ace in order to save him. However, just as he would jump, he'd sense a strong force holding him down. Garp, with tears in his eyes, would hold Luffy down, begging him not to intervene. It's at that moment that two swords would pierce through Ace's chest, executing him. Ace's death would spark Whitebeard's rage, and a grand battle would ensue where Luffy would have to go head-to-head against Ace's allies. The loyalty of Whitebeard pirates towards their crewmates would shock Luffy, and he would come to greatly respect them. Despite that, he would still carry out his duties and would successfully take out some big members of Whitebeard's massive fleet. We can assume that the rest of the war would play out the same, with Whitebeard eventually dying and Blackbeard stealing his devil fruit. The only difference here is that Luffy would most likely be the one to yell to his fellow Marines to stop this senseless war instead of Kobe. Despite winning the battle, this war would make Luffy realize that not all Marines are good guys, and that some of them, like Akainu, are way more ruthless than they need to be. This would make him question the entire organization and wonder if they are doing any good at all. Garp would later tell Luffy about Sword, a secret Marine force consisting of Marines who operate freely and can choose what they want to do even if it goes against the government's orders. Considering Luffy's character, I think becoming a part of Sword just makes sense, as he would be able to do much more good than he ever could do as a regular Marine. After some time has passed, the word of Doflamingo's Coliseum tournament would get out, and the government would send Fujitora, along with a team of Marines, in order to capture some pirates and make sure everything goes smoothly. Luffy would also be on that team, and together with Fujitora, he would set sail to Dressrosa. As soon as they get there, the duo would realize that the tournament's main prize is the Mera Mera Nomi. Considering this was Ace's devil fruit, Luffy would ask Fujitora to enter the tournament in order to make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. The Admiral would allow it, and just like in the main story, Luffy would enter the tournament and start destroying the competition. Along the way, he would also meet with Sabo and eventually let him take the devil fruit for himself. While in the Coliseum, both Luffy and Sabo would sense that something weird is going on and would notice that some of the contestants are missing. It's also possible that Luffy would stumble upon Kiros here, who would tell him exactly what's going on and that Doflamingo is responsible for turning contestants into toys. Luffy would instantly relay this information to Fujitora, and although the Admiral would be reluctant to do anything about Doflamingo since he is a warlord, after listening to everything Doflamingo has done, I believe he would eventually agree to do it. Together, Luffy and Fujitora would lead Marines to the underground weapons facility and would liberate the people of Dressrosa along with the imprisoned Tontada slaves. The Tontadas will then aid the Marines alongside the Riku army to destroy the Smile factory in Dressrosa and put an end to Doflamingo's operation for good. After a few intense battles, Luffy would soon come face to face against Doflamingo, while Fujitora would work on slowing down the birdcage in order to protect the citizens. With his abilities put to the real test, Luffy would greatly struggle against Doflamingo, but in the heat of the battle, he would eventually unlock Gear 4 and finally take the warlord down. In the aftermath, Luffy would thank Fujitora for his help and agree with the Admiral's wishes to convince the world government to finally dissolve the warlord system for good, as the warlords are doing way more harm than good. While investigating Doflamingo's businesses, Marines would find evidence of illegal experiments being conducted on Punk Hazard and would immediately inform Luffy and Fujitora about it. Parting ways with Fujitora, Luffy and the big team of Marines would set sail for Punk Hazard and eventually uncover the secret lab run by Caesar Clown. After confronting Caesar, Luffy would eventually defeat him and shut down the experiments. He would also rescue the gigantified children and accompany them to the nearest Marine base. After capturing both Doflamingo and Caesar, Luffy would return to Marineford as a hero. Even the world government higher-ups would acknowledge his achievements and promote him to Vice Admiral. Back at the base, Garp would ask Luffy to go to Fishman Island with him in order to convince his old friend Neptune to take part in this year's reverie. Once they arrive at Fishman Island, they would learn about a coup Hody Jones is planning. But let's be honest, this guy was a pushover even in the main story, and considering Luffy is a seasoned Marine now, he'd wipe the floor with him. To thank him for his protection, the royal family would ask Luffy to be their guest in the royal palace, and he would stay there until the reverie. At Marijoa, Luffy would meet with Green Bull and Fujitora, and together they would discuss what Fujitora is going to say to the rulers of the world about the warlord situation. However, just like in the canon story, their talks would be quickly interrupted by the sudden attack of the Revolutionary Army. Fighting alongside the two admirals and the rest of his fellow Marines, Luffy would help fend off the attack. Also, it's likely that he would come face to face with Sabo at some point, and may even briefly fight him. After Marioa is successfully defended, Luffy and the rest of the Sword members would be contacted by X-Drake to discuss infiltrating Kaido's forces. After some discussion, I believe Luffy would volunteer to go undercover as a spy, along with X-Drake, in order to learn as much as possible about Wano and what Kaido is doing there. After infiltrating Beast Pirates' forces, the pair would meet at the Flower Capital in order to discuss Kaido's global arms trade. While in Wano, Luffy would also be horrified by the huge weapon factories and the miserable conditions the people are forced to live through. Although Luffy would want to do something about it, considering he is a Marine now, he isn't allowed to mess with Emperors of the Sea. Even if he disobeyed orders and tried to take down Kaido, he wouldn't have any support from the Marines, and attacking Kaido's crew on his own would be a death sentence. So, after Kaido's deal with CP0 goes sour, it's most likely that Luffy would return to Marineford, as realistically, there's nothing he can do about the Wano situation. This also unfortunately means that Luffy wouldn't awaken Gear 5 during this time, as his battle against Kaido never happened. Soon after returning from Wano, Luffy and the other Sword members would be informed that Kobe has been kidnapped by the Blackbeard pirates while on a mission. Enraged by this, both Luffy and Garp would immediately gather all Sword members in order to plan the rescue operation. Same as in the original story, Garp would make his interest on Hachinosu, shaking the entire island with his monstrous haki. Luffy and the other Sword members would immediately take advantage of the commotion in order to release Kobe and bring him to safety. Once Kobe is safe, Luffy would rush towards Garp in order to help him in his battle against Aokiji and other Blackbeard commanders. Although Luffy being here would definitely make the situation better than in the original story, considering he never awakened Gear 5, there wouldn't be much he could do against the combined efforts of Blackbeard's commanders. At some point, Garp would realize this and command Luffy to escape the island while he fends off the attackers. Luffy would obviously be against leaving his grandpa like this, but Garp would yell at Luffy, telling him that he and the rest of the Sword are the future of the Marines and that they must survive. With tears going down his face, Luffy would finally listen and evacuate with the rest of the Sword. Immediately after returning to Marineford, Luffy would beg other admirals to do something in order to save Garp, but the world government would deem it too risky and wouldn't want to start an all-out battle against an emperor like Blackbeard. Although disappointed, Luffy would understand why it has to be this way and would focus all of his anger on training even harder than before in order to honor his grandpa's wishes to become the future of the Marines. In the time that follows, Luffy would get sent on countless missions in order to keep the world safe and would work with his allies from Sword to do riskier things that the world government wouldn't necessarily approve. During his adventures, he would often clash with the members of the Revolutionary Army, although with time, he would become understanding of their cause and would eventually realize that they aren't the bad guys the government is making them out to be. By the time Luffy is in his mid-20s, he would be considered one of the strongest Marines and would earn a lot of praise as a hero from people all all over the world, same as his grandfather. He would become an absolute beast that would strike fear into the hearts of pirates. Eventually down the road, he would be offered to become an admiral, a position he would gladly accept with a goal to reform the entire organization from the inside. He may even unlock Gear 5 at some point while fighting against Emperors of the Sea, and would overall work to realize his dreams of changing the world for the better. If you liked this video, you can click on this one next, where I explained what would happen if Luffy awakened Gear 5 in episode 1.